What's this? Oh, that's right. It's an unhaul. Okay, hello everyone. I am Josh. Welcome back to my channel. And today I have a big unhaul, the first unhaul of the year. And honestly, I'm pretty excited about it because it's so many books. Okay, so I have this new thing I'm trying to do every month. Why at the end of each month, I'll pick up a book. Rather, I'll try and motivate myself to pick at least one book. Take off my TBR and get rid of a book that just does not bring me joy, to do it the Marie Kondo way. It seems like it's getting easier the more I do it. And really, it's just a question of why do I have a book and why do I want to read it? And I will say this is going to be an unhaul, obviously, but more than that, it's going to be a pretty discussion heavy video of why I want to unhaul something, because I think it's important to ask myself, why did I buy this? Why do I think I want to read it? And now why do I not want to read it? So I can make better decisions moving forward and just understand myself as a reader. If that's not something you're interested in, this might not be the video for you. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So these, I'm just gonna go and show you guys these. Actually, these are two books. I'm kind of embarrassed I even decided to buy because this wasn't even that long ago. This wasn't like a year ago. This was like within the last 6 months. I saw these at Goodwill and I bought them because they're cheap, they're there, and I figured they would be easy reads. I had a phase. Well, I loved Dan Brown. You might be able to see Dan Brown up there, and I read all of his books up to that point, up to like 2009, and I loved him at the time, and then I sort of grew out of him, even though I didn't even read it, I didn't like. I just sort of started gravitating towards other things instead of the most popular common denominator type book. And then I figured, well, they're super cheap because they're at Goodwill, and I'm sure they'll be at least casual fun, right? Like in the same way that Stephen King is casual fun. And then the more I think about it, the more I ask myself, is that even true? I'm not convinced that Dan Brown is going to be casual fun, even though he used to be. I have a feeling that if I read these, I'm just going to actively hate them, and not in a fun way. And even if I don't, I don't think there are other books that I would rather read for fun than just these two. I think I gravitated towards these because they were cheap and because I thought they would be easy. But I'm learning the hard way, rather, that reading a book that I think will be just for fun isn't necessarily a good choice. I need to stop wasting my time on books that don't bring me joy, that I have nothing really to value here, just so I can say for the sake of it that I read another book, which isn't necessarily why I read for fun, just that, it's complicated. That's not started off very well, this discussion, but let's keep going. Similar to that, but not quite as extreme, is John Grisham. I have more respect for him as a writer. I did like him, but I also know I feel like he has more books that are worth reading. Like, I know there was one that in lit class that I remember liking a lot. That's Time to Kill. And I haven't reread it. Maybe I should see if it actually stands up. I know it had a lot of commentary that was at least very profound in high school. These other books were always fun. They're fun, like legal procedures, thrillers, and whatnot. But I'm at the point in my life where there are things that bring me more fun. If I want a fun book, it won't be Dan Brown or John Grisham. It just won't be. I just don't have a good reason to want to read this just because it was cheap in there. Next up is honestly one of the hardest books for me to get rid of, because this isn't even one I got necessarily for cheap. I got it when I was doing book of the month, which is a bigger conversation about book buying, and that's going to be Writers and Lovers by Lily King. And this is one that gets very popular, gets a lot of praise, generally speaking. But the question is, does it have a lot to say, or is it just a fun book? It isn't bad, it's a fun book. It's just this question of, it's part of the reason I got rid of Book of the Month, is that these books on Book of the Month are often going to be books that are meant to appeal to the mass public. And it doesn't mean they're not worth reading. I just have to ask myself if that's necessarily a good reason. Like, I value community opinion to an extent. Like, it's kind of like why I like the book community at large, not just BookTube, but Goodreads or Storygraph, because I can connect with individuals who I can then over time begin to understand better and see how their opinions, how their reading tastes mesh with mine. In doing so, I can get like a consensus, but it's more of a catered consensus, not necessarily just one that's catered to everyone. And that's what I'm worried about here. While I do think I might get some joy out of this, it's one of those things where there are other books that bring me more joy. It's as simple as that. I think there's more to get out of this than, say, a Dan Brown book. But at the end of the day, there are other books in this world with my short lifespan that I'd rather read, and that's the case. That's the short end of it. Next up is a book that is akin to Dan Brown, but I don't think he's necessarily as bad as Dan Brown. But it's still like a popular book that I bought because it was cheap. I think I got this when I was buying from Book Outlet, which was something I had a phase where I bought a bunch of books all at once. Like, at least half of my collection, my TBR, was from there. And it was this thing where I would buy a book because it sounded mildly interesting and it was popular and it was cheap. And those were just the wrong reason to have a book. Like, I wanted to increase my collection and I was willing to put quantity over quality. And I'm at the point now where I understand. Like, it's a great privilege here, but I understand that I have the ability to decide to read something regardless if it might be a little bit more expensive. I don't have to gravitate towards books that are cheaper just because they're cheap. And I don't think that's a good reason for me to pick a book. And I know that's a very privileged position, but because I'm in that position, I think it's important that I recognize that and I don't just go to books just because they're cheap and now they're on my shelf. I don't think I have an obligation to read this just because I invested in it. I made a poor choice. I bought this book and I don't think I should have. And I say part of that because I read his other book. I didn't like it at all. In fact, I trying to remember which one it was. It's very popular. But, you know, thriller horrors just don't do well for me. Like, I want a horror that is a thriller, not a thriller that's trying to be a horror, because it's just always, it feels like the Nickelodeon version of horror, which I know is a bit of a stretch. You know, it's just this very trimmed down horror that just makes it feel like a caricature. It just doesn't work. And I do see Alex North sort of in the same vein as Riley Sager's. And at least Riley Sager, his books give me some joy in the hating of it. This one I just didn't like at all. Not this one, but his other one rather. Next up, another case of they were cheap, very, very mildly interesting, and so I got them when I was buying from Book Outlet. 2 books, which one of which was, I think it was the first one I bought, was actually a sequel in the series, The Little Shop of Found Things. You might not have heard of this. It's by Paula Braxton. And there's a reason for that. No one talks about it. And why did I buy this? Because I like magic and I like witches. That's such a... There's so many books that meet that criteria. My biggest thanks in this situation is that I did not pick this up sooner, because there was a while there where I was picking up books because I bought them and I felt like I had an obligation to read them, and now I'm glad I didn't do that, because I felt like I would have just wasted my time with these books. I'm sure they were right for someone, but not for me. I know they would not. Like, it's just the entire tone, or I guess the atmosphere of these books, based on the cover at least, gives me the impression it's just not the kind of book that I want. That's the short end of it. Just wasting money on books because they're cheap and they're there, and it doesn't bring me joy. Another one similar to Dan Brown and Alex North and so on and so forth, but not quite the same, because I do think, from what I've heard, I trust people more, that Josh Malerman has more talent. But I bought a lot of his books because he was popular, but I haven't read a single one of them yet. I just wanted to read Bird Box, and I ended up leaving Unburied Carol on my shelf, even though I still feel unsure about whether or not there's any real reason besides his name that makes that worth reading. And don't get me wrong, there are some authors who I want to read their books just because their name is on it. But I don't even know Josh Malerman. Why am I investing in him when I have no idea about him? And my expectations are mild, to be frank. Not as low as Alex North, which ended up proving to be as bad exactly as I wanted, but I think there are other books I can gravitate towards, like House at the Bottom of the Lake, whatever. Like, that one I'd rather read before this one or these other ones. Honestly, that seems more interesting to me. And it's just like, why am I wasting my time with a book just because it was cheap and it was there and it has his name on it? It's just not a good reason. And I might change my mind years on the road when I read his other book, Bird Box. Maybe I'll think, oh my God, he is a must-buy author. In which case I might buy it. But until then, if it's on my shelf, it's going to distract me from books that matter more to me. That's the truth of it. Next up is a book that is like everything else. It was cheap and it was there on Book Outlet. The Mammoth Book of Nightmare Stories. And this is one where I might have made an exception for the fact that this isn't a very diverse collection, and these names don't even seem that big or even appeal to me at all. I might still have given it a try because I love horror, and I wouldn't have minded giving it a shot to some underrated or undiscovered authors. And maybe I'm insulting them by saying that, but the reason I decided not to do that for this one is because it's not an audio, and while there are books that I'm willing to put the extra effort forward to read, the amount of effort it would take to do that, I don't like this book. This book doesn't have enough, in my opinion, to make it considered like worth that amount of effort. It's a very personal conversation for me about what I physically read or read on an ebook or even read text-to-speech versus audio, which is my preferred and easiest form of reading. And this is just one of those books where I might still have read it if it was on audio, but without that, it sort of gets lumped in with everything else. This next one is one I did get on Book Outlet as well. Or did I? No, I didn't. I think I got the first one on Book Outlet, and this one was a collection, so I bought the sequel of this. When did I get it? I think it was in the States. I was at a fancy bookstore, and I bought this. This is a beautiful edition. I thought it was signed. I think it was just the first one that was signed, of A Gathering of Shadows by D.E. Schwab. the book 2 in this series, and the thing is, I didn't like the first one, and it was one of those series I really wanted to push through and try it. But the reality is that I don't think the tone of the series is for me. I love I love fantastical worlds. Like I think V.E. Schwab should be an easy read in the same way that I thought Dan Brown. The difference here is that there were aspects in her books, like in fantasy or sci-fi, that appeal to me in a much grander scale than just a random thriller book. And that's why I sort of be more okay with her books. But knowing that I read the first one, I didn't mesh with it, why am I going to force myself to try and read the second one? And for what? I mean, I probably need to know about the first one. I literally have no clue what was going on. The reason I think this might be different is one I've heard might be a bit better, but also it's narrated by a different actor. One of my favorite ones actually, Kate Redding, who does a lot of epic fantasy stuff. And that might seem weird to you, but I do think a narrator can define your experience, which part goes back to me talking about, text-to-speech. Like there's certain books that I can't do text-to-speech on, or if I do it, it takes an extra level of focus and persistence and perseverance rather, to really be able to get into a book that is so monotone as that. And that was what the case with the first book here. Mixed with this, the writing not really meshing with me. The tone of this Victorian era, which honestly isn't my. For some reason, I have something against Victorian settings. Not like I'm not going to always never read them, but I find myself genuinely not liking them as much for whatever reason. And this is one of the situations where I don't think the book isn't worth reading. I don't think it's like a shitty book that I bought just because it was cheap. I just think that I need to let it go and accept the fact the series isn't for me. And that's what this question's about. This one is about accepting that fact and being okay with it. I just had this massive thing about FOMO and quitting, and all that just comes together, me really not wanting to give up on a book or a series even. Next up, more stupid book outlet books that I bought just because they were cheap in there. And mildly interesting, Demonologist, which is a book that I never heard anything about. I tried going stuff, and there were several books that meet these categories of books that I bought because they were cheap in there on Good Book Outlet. And a few of them I kept because after investigating a bit more, I felt like there was not just the premise, but also a consensus of people that I trust that suggests that it might be worth my time. And like this was one that just wasn't worth it. Like this is some random book about a guy who's a professor and a quote-unquote skeptic, which seems more like a denialist, who finds out his daughter is possessed or something, tries to get her unpossessed. On the surface, it sounds interesting, but everything I read about it seems like it's not worth reading. I know books are very personal, but I also feel like too many publishers are willing to publish a book because it sounds interesting rather than finding an author who can actually write an interesting, compelling story. And it frustrates me because now I have to pick through which ones are the good writers and which ones are just the fluff. Bryce Sager. Same idea here. Above Us, Only Sky. This is one I almost got rid of before. Okay, I didn't do it because it seemed intriguing. And then can we turn to it again? It's just it doesn't bring me joy. There's nothing about it. It makes it seem exceptional. A Girl is Born with Wings. And that seems like a not even that interesting premise, to be frank. Like it reminds me of a book that I read back in December called Memory Collectors, which was about a girl who basically could feel the emotions that people left on objects, which on the premise honestly sounds more compelling than this. The execution was just so bad. And I don't want to say I don't want to lump them all together, but I'm worried it's not be the same thing. It just doesn't call to me. Next up are a few books that I think it was more than just a cheapness that I bought it. Like this one, Warm Bodies. I liked the movie and I thought maybe it'll be good. But I still don't think that's enough. I don't think there's enough of a draw here to make it worth reading. Like it seems to get good reviews rather. I think I might actually enjoy it if I read it, but the fact that I might enjoy something isn't enough when there are plenty of other things that might bring me more than just joy, but just new levels of excitement and thought-provokingness. Like this does do something new, but it's just still not quite enough. And when it comes to the fact that I have so many books, it's not just the fact that I had so many books, it's that I had so many books and it's becoming more and more clear which ones actually matter significantly more than the rest. I'm just repeating myself here, I apologize. Next up is a book that I bought because it was cheap and it was reviewed by a popular booktuber that I like. That popular booktuber didn't even like the book that much. They thought it was good. But this is a YA novel about a girl, I think, who was by herself in the middle of space. And the premise sounds interesting, but the reality is it's really hard for me to connect with YA sci-fi. I find it difficult to find books that work for me. There are exceptions, as always, but given the reviews on this, especially the review of the person whose opinion I actually tend to trust, I just don't think it's worth my time just because it was cheap and literally mildly interesting. This next one is one that like I don't think is going to be a bad book, a book not worth reading even. That is The River of Consciousness, and by Oliver Sacks. This is a collection of essays, I think one of his last books that he wrote before he died. And this one was read by someone I trust, which I think was Locke Petition, who seemed to give it a high praise. And the reason I ended up choosing not to read this is because I have so many books on my nonfiction list that are very similar, and even those that aren't on my list, like those by Oliver Sacks, why am I reading this one before his other works? I think there are other works, even by him alone, let alone other people, that I think are just worth my attention first. And I know it's kind of harsh, but I just don't see this book as a quintessential thing to prioritize in that big list of books that are akin to this one, without talking about consciousness or the science of life and existence. And then finally is a book that honestly was another hard one to get rid of because I do think it would feel impactful, and that is Tin Man by Sarah Winman. First off, the cover, spectacular, and I think there were positive reviews by people, but it seems like one of those books that it will be emotionally satisfying, but it will be unique. And maybe that's me being too harsh, but at the core of it, I just think there are other books that give me both emotional satisfaction and something more, some added depth. I also don't love the fact that I'm pretty sure a straight white woman writing about two queer men. And I say that as someone who loved Song of Achilles. It's just, I don't know if, it's just another reason why I'm not sure this is, like, there are other books from perspectives that are actually queer that I think I'd rather be reading, quite frankly. And that feels harsh because this is one like I kind of do want to keep, but I have to look at it in comparison to other books. And it's not one that brings me a lot of joy. Now, those are all the books I'm getting rid of right now. It's a massive unhaul. I did not expect to get rid of so many. It would just get easier and easier, like I said. Now, one thing I will say is that because there are some books that I still feel unsure about, I would appreciate it if anyone who's still watching, if there's one book you think I should keep, let me know what that book is. And if any book gets at least 3 votes to keep, I'll keep it. Any one book, rather. The book that has 3 votes or more, I will keep the one that has the most votes. And if you particularly hate a book, feel free to vote against the book as well. You can give me a vote for one and vote against one if you actually want to. But I would love your feedback on if any of these, or if I'm being wrong about any of these, so I should really just give it a shot. And I won't just keep it, I'll try to make it a priority to read in the coming months. Thank you so much for watching this. Hopefully it wasn't too repetitive. I don't know when this is going to go up. I have so many videos I've recorded at this point, and none of them have gone up of late. School has started back, and I am not making progress. It's a lot easier to record than it is to edit, that's for sure. And I want to get these up. I have so much stuff, not to mention end-of-year content still to film, and I feel overwhelmed by that and by school, but also an intense desire to want to do it all. It's just, sitting down and doing it. It's hard. Lack of motivation on all fronts of late, which is unfortunate. But thanks for watching. If you're watching this, that means clearly it went up, which I'm glad. And as always, stay safe, and I'll see you all next time, okay? Goodbye.